When the Atlanta Hawks surprised the NBA world by making a deep playoff run in 2021 in which they outplayed both the New York Knicks and the #1 seeded Philadelphia 76ers in the first two rounds to make it to their first Eastern Conference Finals since 2015, the thought was this was a young, up-and-coming team with a budding superstar in Trae Young that was going to be taking the league by storm in just a few short seasons. A team that played with a ton of confidence, grit, and vigor to make them a real threat on a nightly basis. But following that season, the Hawks disappointed. They finished 9th in the Eastern Conference with a bunch of teams leapfrogging them in the standings and barely squeaking into the playoffs by way of the play-in before ultimately getting embarrassed in the first round of the playoffs in 5 games. And after a season in which they grossly underperformed relative to expectations, the Hawks knew if they wanted to remain competitive, they had to make a big splash in adding star-level talent to their roster to pair alongside Trae Young and mask some of his deficiencies in the defensive end. And when the San Antonio Spurs looking to rebuild and their all-star Dejounte Murray not fitting their timeline, the Hawks decided to jump on this opportunity and execute a blockbuster trade in which they traded 3 first-round picks, 2 of which being unprotected picks, along with salary filler to the Spurs to acquire Dejounte Murray. And while some thought the fit with Murray and Trae Young would be questionable, the fact that the Hawks added a then all-star, a high-level defender and athletic finisher at the rim, that this would elevate the Hawks back to where they were the season prior and potentially a title contender with the added depth on their roster between Bogdanovich, Capella, John Collins, and DeAndre Hunter, until it didn't. And without getting into the nuances and issues of the Hawks and what they struggled with over last season, they would disappoint yet again, hovering around 500 all season long, yet again making it to the playoffs by way of the play-in before ultimately getting beaten in the first round by the Boston Celtics in 6 games. And while the Hawks made some offseason moves, they finally moved off of John Collins and his contract and making some small moves on the margins. Thus far to start this year, the Hawks are still just as disappointing as they have been over the last 2 seasons, and in fact, you could argue they've been even worse, falling behind some of their competitors in the Eastern Conference. But why is this happening? Why is a seemingly talented team with what most would consider to be a franchise-level player on their squad that they have tried to build around, why would a team that was on the up and up just a couple of seasons ago continue to fall so short of expectations? Well, let's dive into it further. As always, if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, it would mean a great deal to me if you subscribe to help the channel grow. And in return, I'll be providing more NBA content like this. We're actually nearing 25,000 subscribers, and I cannot thank you all enough for the love and support on the channel. It really does mean a great deal to me. Now, after that disappointing season in 2022, the year after making the Eastern Conference Finals, it was pretty clear what the Atlanta Hawks lacked as a team. They were incredible on offense that played with a high degree of ball movement, speed, and efficient scoring, finishing 2nd in the league in offensive rating, but their defense was downright awful. Teams got whatever they wanted against the Hawks, especially from outside. And so for the Hawks, when it came to winning games, it really was a matter of just trying to outscore their opponent in a shootout because defense was just put by the wayside. And so defense was the ultimate priority going into that offseason. And Dejounte Murray not only was a player coming off an all-star season and one of the better perimeter defenders in the league, but was a player who had developed his game into being one of the better two-way players in the NBA. And while on paper, I liked the move for the Hawks because I felt that it gave the Hawks a nice balance on offense and defense in the backcourt. As I've said before on the channel, I still thought they grossly overpaid in giving up 3 first-round picks to get Murray. This isn't a superstar level player that we're talking about here. And while yes, you had subsequent trades that followed, like the Wolves trading 4 first-round picks for Rudy Gobert, the Cavs offering 3 first-round picks for Donovan Mitchell, which almost justified the Murray trade, but those were still overpays as well. You're mortgaging a lot of your future for players who aren't top 10 players in the NBA. And of course, here we are into the 2nd season since that trade was made, and early returns on the deal are not good. As I mentioned, the Hawks finished 500 last season and an early exit in the playoffs. Their defense hardly improved. They went from being 26th in the league on defense to 22nd, and so far this season, you're seeing more of the same, and I actually should rephrase, they're even worse coming out of the gate than they did last season. Their offense is still good, top 5 in the league, high scoring, high volume shooting team, but their defense is atrocious, currently 28th in the NBA on that end of the floor. And so what's happening here? Because on paper, this Hawks team should not be this bad. And in theory, they shouldn't be this bad defensively when they have decent defenders. Guys like Murray, who's a solid perimeter defender, Clint Capella, although not the defender they used to be, but still a decent rim protector. Onyeka Okongwu, same thing, who they just signed to an extension as a decent rim protector. Not saying that they have elite level defenders on their team, but being 28th on defense is inexcusable for a team that, one, is looking to win now and kind of went all in to get a player like Dejounte Murray. Well, here's the problem. and I know this is probably going to trigger some Hawks fans, but it's Trae Young. Look, Trae Young, as gifted as he is on offense, is so bad on the defensive side of the ball that it doesn't matter how good or how hard some of these other guys are playing defense, it's not gonna make up for Trae Young's deficiencies. Like, here's the thing, it's one thing to just be bad on defense. Either you're too small, you're not quick enough to keep up with your man, getting beat off the dribble, but it's another thing when you also have low IQ when it comes to playing defense, and it impacts the overall team and their frustration when they continue to see you making missteps on defense. Like in the game of basketball, so much focus is what's happening on offense, who's scoring the ball, who's making the right plays, who's making all the highlights, but defense, team defense, is just as hard, if not more complex, in ensuring your opponent doesn't get an easy basket. For Trae Young, it's more than just not trying on the defensive end. It's countless times throughout this season and last season he will lose his man playing off the ball, doesn't read switches, miscues on backdoor cutters. Like, Trae Young's on-ball defense is still pretty bad, but his off-ball defense is some of the worst in the league. And all that effort that his teammates put into defending a given possession gets thrown out the window when Trae loses his man cutting to the basket or misses a switch, and all of a sudden his man is open on the perimeter for a three. And if you're the Hawks, what's becoming more concerning now is you're seeing the frustration from the players starting to build. They're tired of losing, and they're tired of seeing Trae not doing his job on defense. Because look, not everyone is going to be great on defense. And when you're undersized like Trae Young is, in the NBA, it's going to be hard to effectively play high quality defense, but the least you can do is try to be better on that end of the floor, because as we're seeing right now from this team, it doesn't matter how good you are on offense. It is important, don't get me wrong, but if you're abysmal on the other end of the floor, in the long run, you're not going to be nothing more than an average team at best. And that's what the Hawks have been, an average team for the past 3 seasons now. And what makes it more troubling is they don't have a ton to work with for the future, with the 3 first-round picks going to the Spurs. And really, outside of Trae Young, they don't really have any young studs that you can say, these are franchise cornerstones that you can build with for the future. And while yes, I know it's still early in the season, I still think Quinn Snyder is one of the better coaches in the NBA and can figure out a way to get this crew to right the ship a bit to where they can make the playoffs. But is this team really anything more than a first-round exit? And if you're a team with limited draft capital for the future, not a ton of future assets, and you're staying mid and being in basketball purgatory, what are we doing here? And so I guess that's really the next question. Where do the Hawks go from here? Because the roster is currently constructed is not it. At best, they can be a 500 team to a slightly above 500 team and play inbound. And I know a lot of people are going to come at me in the comments for this one, but the best course of action the Hawks can take is trading Trae Young, and I'll explain why. First and foremost, as I mentioned before, you're seeing in the players' faces, their body language, and their frustration on the court that they're getting tired of Trae and his lack of effort on defense. And as gifted as Trae is on offense, it's not making up for the defensive woes, and it's why you're continuing to see teams expose this weakness of the Atlanta Hawks and picking apart Trae on every possession. And while yes, I'm sure some will say you'd have to be out of your damn mind to trade a superstar player like Trae Young, who is only 25 and in his prime. Well, that's the thing, is if you're the Hawks, you have to be asking yourself, is Trae Young a player you can effectively build around to win a championship and be the best player on said championship team? And if that's not the case, then you should be trading said player when his trade value is really high. Because despite Trae's weaknesses on defense, the focus and attention that he commands on offense, a gifted passer, floor general, facilitator, he can get you a massive haul in return. Like, I know everything that I just mentioned earlier makes it seem like I think Trae is trash and no one should want him. No, he's still a star. He's one of the better players in the NBA. I just don't think his game makes him a #1 option on a championship team, and the Hawks aren't anywhere closer to being a championship level team than they were 3 or 4 years ago. And there will be teams interested in Trae that would shell out a lot for him in the form of young players and draft picks. Picks that the Hawks need to recoup after losing a fair amount in the Murray trade. Now, I say the Hawks would be best served if they traded Trae Young while his value is high or before he himself gets disgruntled and demands a trade, but if you're going to trade Trae, then you might as well blow it up and trade their other assets who aren't going to fit their overall timeline. Bogdanovich, Capella, Patty Mills, maybe even look to move Murray as well. Otherwise, you're really just going to look at the Hawks staying mid for the foreseeable future until they really fix up their defensive woes, which a lot of that sits on Trae Young, and also just changing their overall mentality. Because these guys, for the most part, don't play with any sense of urgency given where they find themselves in the standings after 2 very disappointing seasons. But either way, I'd love to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.